We're going to wind up chapter 10 by looking at some of the modifications that we can make to reports and graphs. We can, when choosing a report, choose a specific date range, or we can choose, for example, current quarter, previous quarter, year to date, things of that nature. You can add subcolumns to have it show things like percentage change from the previous period or things of that nature, which can be really helpful just from a management standpoint to look at how well you're doing as compared to some other period of time. There are different kinds of customized reports that are particularly helpful. When I run my trust accounting process once a month, the bar has very specific reports that I have to generate in order to comply with their audit requirements. And those are not standard QuickBooks kinds of forms. So what has been the easiest thing for me to do is to create memorized reports with all of the parameters selected. And then I don't have to remember every month when I go in as to exactly which parameter needs to be selected in order to cause the report to come out correctly. And frankly, when I started doing this, that's exactly what I do. I literally would have to get the book out every month, put it next to me because I only did these once a month to remember exactly which parameters needed to be selected in order to cause the reports to generate correctly. And then I thought, why am I doing this? I could just memorize this report and just then change the date range every month that I need to run it for, and I'm all good. The other thing is that I have a report that I have to show, client balances that are in my trust account, and it's really kind of a balance sheet report. The thing is, it will show all of my clients, whether or not they have a balance. So after having been in practice as long as I have, I could have pages and pages of this report listing clients, many of them most of them, frankly, having zero balances, just to get the handful of clients that actually have balances. So there's a filter that I can select that says only choose non-zero balances for that report. And it's really nice because now I get a report that's half a page rather than, 8 or 10 pages. We can do things like change the header and footer options in the reports. You can change column width, and as I said, you can memorize reports and have specialized reports, which is like my trust accounting report. You can then schedule them and email those to folks if you need to. You can have people comment on the reports and make contributions to your reports. So QuickBooks also has a way for you to modify some of its existing templates. Let's say, for example, your billing, this is an example of the invoice template, and you can have additional, or you can frankly remove some of the default items that already come on those. So the example on your slide here is the invoice template. And so it shows that, automatically the date will show up in the header, the invoice number will show up in the header. You could certainly also change those to footer. Or you may decide you don't want those to show up in the header on every single page, in which case you would uncheck that and it would just show up on the first page and not every single page after that. You can get into the designer window, which I will show you shortly, and it allows you to drag features around and have them put in different places on the templates. So again, if you decide you want your date to show up in a different place, or you have a customer message and you want it to be on a particular place when the invoice gets printed out or PDF'd, you can change the elements to do that. Now, the snap to grid feature is particularly helpful because as you're moving these elements around on the screen, they're just kind of floating. And it might look on the screen like they're lined up together, and then you print it and you just will see very sort of subtle misalignment, and it can be kind of bothering and sort of sloppy looking. So the snap to grid feature basically it creates a grid, and then if you get the item anywhere close to the grid line, it will pull that item tight to the grid line. And so as long as you've lined up everything on the same grid line, when you go to print it out, the grid lines won't print, but you will have everything perfectly crisply aligned, up and down or side to side, however you choose to do it. Our reports can also integrate with Microsoft Office. You can do collection letters or specific repeat type template form letters to send, and it will pull the data from your QuickBooks and then generate those into a Word document if you choose to do that. You can also, similarly, as we've been doing all semester, use Excel, and you can cause the Excel to not just be a static document, but to then be updated itself every time you change the report. So if you choose the update existing worksheet, it will make sure that any changes that you make in QuickBooks, since you did that export, will now also reflect in the Excel spreadsheet, and not make it so that you have to go back and regenerate a new spreadsheet every time you make a change. So with that, I'm going to stop at the quiz and we will hop over to the live version. I'm going to kind of attack this in, I suppose, no particular order, but we'll start with doing the modifying a layout of a template. So we go to our lists menu and then scroll down to templates. And these are all of the default templates that happen to come in the version that I happened to open this morning. So we'll choose a product invoice because that's something that we have worked with quite a bit. And so you will see here with this template, we could add a logo if we wanted to add a logo, but I don't have a logo. So you can change a color scheme. You can change all of the fonts here. And so you can, have the title, for example. I don't know, maybe we'll make that, I'm not sure what size that is, but we'll make it 24. I'll make it bigger than that. There, now it's quite obvious. Now, again, not great, not something I would want to do, but I wanted to do something dramatic enough to be able to illustrate it. In the company and transaction, do we care that we do or don't have a fax number on here? We may not have a fax number in here anyway. What about phone number? Oh, it's down here at the bottom. So let's say, for example, that's just a really bad spot to have the phone number show up. So I'm going to go into, and it will ask me whether I want to make a copy or change my default. And it really won't even ask me. It will just tell me so that I don't inadvertently overwrite the original document. So we are going to scroll down to where I saw that little bugger down here. And so if I want to, basically just drag that up, and maybe I don't know, put it there, and I've got the snap to grid already selected and the grid is shown, but if there wasn't the grid here, in fact, I will take the grid off so you can see what it looks like. See, now we've got no grid. I will also take off the snap to grid because now these things just float pretty freely, and you gotta kind of try and eyeball it to make sure that they're lined up. Otherwise, again, they will be kind of wonky. So I like to keep the snap to grid on. It has a very tight grid spacing here of 1/16 of an inch, so that the grid that it will attach itself to, again, to the naked eye, if I'm off by a 16th here or there because I accidentally got it to the grid line, right adjacent to it, it hopefully will not be that obvious. If I want to do larger grid lines, let's do 3/8 of an inch. So it's not letting me, I would have to pull it pretty dramatically to get it off this grid line, because now I've made my grid lines so far apart and it's snapping to the nearest one. Now I've pulled it far enough that now it's caught the next grid line. And now it's jumping back. So the differences when I had 1/16 were so subtle because the grid lines were so close together that I was able to move it in very small increments. But given that I changed my grid lines to 3/8 of an inch, now the differences require me to really force it to move. And so maybe having the bigger grid lines is better, because now it's really obvious if it's not aligned on the same grid line as the fields above or below it. Now I only dragged the title. Maybe I want to put the phone number next to it. And so now, rather than having them above and below, I now have the field set. And if I'm happy with all of this, note that we now have, this is going to be copy of Intuit product invoice and not the original one. So if I wanted to go in and use this invoice, we'll just save this. Now we see that I have copy of Intuit product invoice, not just the Intuit product invoice. And so because it groups them together, but then it alphabetizes them within the group. So you might want to rename these. If you wanted to have all of your product invoices show up together in this list, you might want to rename this, and we'll edit the template. And so we will, instead of calling it copy of, we'll call it -2. And now that will cause it to show up with its counterparts that, so I could have Intuit product invoice 1, 2, 3, or I could name it, Intuit product invoice with phone, without phone, or something like that. And then they would all show up here together in this list. And again, you can modify all of these layouts or create your own. Now, if I wanted to go here and create some invoices for some customers, I'm going to choose my customer here. Yeah. I'm going to select a job. And now it's going to give me a hard time here because just wanted to make an invoice. Okay, so the template that it has here, this is a particular template for this kind of file. The default file for this was specific, but I can choose the Intuit product invoice 2 that I just created. So go back to the Rock Castle invoice versus the product 2 invoice that changed some of the columns from the customized one that had been there previously. And off this, but before I do that, let's go ahead and just see a preview of this invoice and see now, because I've chosen that new layout I created, you see the phone number that's now here sort of next to the other one. I didn't quite snap them together, so we've got a little gap in between the two of them. But anyway, that would be how we could make some modifications of some existing templates. Through the reports real quick, some customization. Let's say we'll do our balance sheet standard, and maybe we want to show columns total only. I don't know. No, that's not a good one for this. Sort by default. Let's have it sort by total. Not that we would ever want to do this, because we know that we want our balance sheet to go in order of liquidity and not by amount. So what it's done here is it's taken our other current assets and put those first, and then it's got our checking and savings. And so again, this is not how we would present a balance sheet for someone's review, but just to illustrate that if we for some reason wanted one done by total, we certainly have the ability to do that. We can go into the customization, we can create some filters. Let's see, we'll go in here. The advanced, for me, this is where I choose when I'm going to do my report for clients, the non-zero. Otherwise, we'll choose, well, let's just choose active, just to not make it too unwieldy. But now you can see that this report prints with every balance sheet account in it, whether or not there's a balance in it. And so this creates a much longer report because we've got accounts in it with no balances, and we don't really need to see those. So the report was correctly customized to make sure that it only shows the accounts that actually have balances in them. If we wanted to, again, make some changes to this that we wanted to be able to use time after time, we would use the memorize report, and then we could then choose a category that this report applies to. For me, for my trust account balancing, that goes into my banking, and then we can call it something that is meaningful to us so that we'll remember, oh, that's the report I need for this project or that project. And again, these could be management reports that could be customized in any way that management chose to have them. We can hide our headers. We can, again, go in and decide what we do or don't want. Maybe we don't care about the time that our report was prepared, so we're going to deselect that. And maybe we don't want it printed on pages after the first page. We only just want it on page 1. This may only be page 1 anyway. But see, now we don't have, well, we only have 1 page here anyway, but if it were to print, we don't have the time in here. Last thing on this report that I'm going to call your attention to is this report basis, accrual versus cash. And if you have not had accounting, it's probably beyond the scope of this class to describe in detail the differences between those two. But there are differences, and you should know which one you are choosing and why for particular reports. And so, and again, it will change that there. So you don't have to, if you want a report done on a different basis than what you happen to have as the default, you don't have to go into the system and change these preferences. The reports will just change based on these radio buttons here. And that concludes Chapter 10.